discussing a presentation by Saurabh Gupta from the University of Illinois at Champaign, Urbana-Champaign. And he's talking about robot learning by understanding egocentric videos. It's part of the robot learning seminar series at CMU. For people that are new to this podcast series, we are doing occasionally we talk about actually technical presentations in the realm of robotics. The purpose of the Not Even Wrong podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. And what we do very often here is, in a general way, we explain the process of knowledge creation, because that's what we really are as a hedge fund. We're in the business of knowledge creation. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. So that, the word knowledge doesn't really pop up there, but we've spoken many times before, and I urge you to go back on our website. You can go all the way back and see all our episodes where we talk about how knowledge and wealth and freedom and all these things are really intertwined, and wealth creation and knowledge are really the same, two sides of the same coin. So therefore, these types of presentations, the technical side of things is, of course, meant to help us understand where the technology is going. At Orange Capital Partners, we like to see ourselves at the crossroads of science and technology, when technology gets mature enough to sort of drop from the bucket of science into the bucket of technology, and then also being applied as an entrepreneurial, in the entrepreneurial context. So having said all of that, we are very focused on robotics, and therefore any kind of robotics manipulation and learning is at the forefront of what we do. Typically we do about 2 to 3 conferences a year. NeurIPS is one of them, CVPR is one of them, and then we kind of oscillate between local ones like BARS last year, the Bay Area Robotics Seminar at Stanford, or Bay Learn, which is a sort of an industry conglomerate type learning event here also at in the Bay Area. Nevertheless, in this particular case now, these presentations that we discuss are from all kinds of different academic institutions. We're specifically interested in academia because we believe that this field is driven as much by academic research as by industrial, sort of developments. But in a nutshell, I think you could sort of say that the creative side, the innovative ideas, they come from academia, and the scaling, the brute force stuff comes from the industry side. So the more interesting part, at least from a creative perspective, okay, what kind of ideas, what kind of approaches, what kind of models could be used? That's more on the academic side. Not to say that the scaling is not important. The scaling is actually a lot more important, and there's a lot of creative systems technology to be applied there too. But we see ourselves very often also exposed more to the academic side, because that's the open side, which is, of course, great. This is Not Even On podcast. It's September 29, 2024. This is Krim Delco. It's a Sunday. There's no update for the year. We're up 25.2%. The market's up 20.2%. We're outperforming by 5%. So Saurabh Gupta talks about robot learning by understanding egocentric video. So there's a couple of things here, okay? Let's dissect. Even the title is very, very dense here, okay? What is robot learning? What does that actually mean? That means that we use algorithms that learn from data how a robot should behave. And learning means eventually learning how to actuate the limbs of the robot, right? So if a robot wants to grasp something, what that actually means in physical terms is that the limb has to move through space, open up, let's say, a hand and grab something. So actuators have to be actuated, have to be initiated, but that's just a low level of action. There's also higher levels, such as the meta level. Let's say, okay, where am I going and what is my goal? Things like that. So robot learning is a multifaceted problem with low level and high level actuator and meta learning type problems to be solved. And I think Professor Gupta talks about all of these in one of his slides. The video, everything is going to be in the show notes, the links. So just refer to the links and the papers. What I find interesting here is the sort of the difference between robot learning and what we have in the large language space modeling space, where when it's only in digital space, so when we're only talking language and text, we don't have that type of problem, right? We don't need to actually think about, okay, what does writing mean and what does a sentence mean? We have to think about it a little bit, but it's not crucial. But here, it's really crucial, right? You have sort of, let's say you could have a robot in simulation doing stuff, and there everything is sort of in abstract, but then in physical terms, you actually have to move that thing. And that's a different type of problem. So what this presentation is really addressing is how can we solve that problem by watching videos. That's the key, right? So we're watching a two-dimensional virtual space type embodiment, which is, let's say, humans acting in a kitchen, humans acting at home, humans helping other humans, whatever it is we're trying to learn. And then the robot is watching that and learning from that, but has to translate that into 3D. So that's one of the fundamental problems is, and it's going to be discussed a little bit down the road here, how do we translate, from 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions? But let me go through the points that Gupta is talking about here. In particular, he's talking about 4 points here. One is, he's introducing so-called affordance maps. And that means, to use his own words, we apply learning only as needed, okay? So when you have, let's take a self-driving car. A self-driving car is approaching a crossing. Now, without affordance maps, the robot is exposed to basically a very large space of opportunistic actions, right? It could go in all kinds of directions. The affordance map would limit the possible actions on the, let's say, 3 lanes in front of you, right? You can turn left, you can go straight, you can go right. You can't go backwards, and you can't go in any kind of sort of angular way off-road. So that would be the affordance map. And of course, crucially, that affordance map itself is also learned. So it's obviously not hard-coded, because that will, in a self-driving car space, that would be crazy. So what, you can't hard-code every possible scenario that the car could be in and say, okay, you can only turn left here, or you can only turn right. So the car has to learn from what it sees through camera, what are the opportunities where it can even go, and then decide where to go. Now, with a robot, with a, let's say, humanoid robot, factory robot, that's even more extreme, because now we're looking at a much bigger action space. Okay, I can approach this fork or this knife in the kitchen in all kinds of ways, grab it in all kinds of ways, and put it in all kinds of ways on all kinds of different positions. So the affordance map, let's say in the example of a kitchen robot, would be, there's a pen, and I can grab that pen really just on the handle. So how about the robot focuses on the handle and how it's going to grab that handle, and not waste its time on any other kind of way to access that particular object. So that will be the affordance maps, and we're not going into too many technical details. Again, there's plenty of links in the show notes about all of that. But what I want to emphasize here is the idea of affordance maps, which we've come across at NeurIPS last year. I forgot exactly where, but I can dig that out also. One of the NeurIPS presentations was about that, I remember. I think the idea is very healthy, right? You want to be restricting the robot as much as you can, but in an organic way. So this is not any kind of hard-coded stuff. And I can give you a good example. For example, we are using FST 12.5 right now, and we've just downloaded it recently. We were on 12.3 for a long time. And I feel like actually the 12.5 is a little bit more wobbly in curves. And I believe that happened because I think Tesla must have removed some hard-coded, maybe barrier functions that made it sort of fit lanes a little bit better, and replaced it with end-to-end learning, and therefore it's a bit more wobbly. Just as an example, but if we reintroduce affordance maps here, which is, again, it's a learned way to restrict the robot on where it should go and what it should do. Now, there's three more things that Professor Gupta talks about. One is when you do robot learning, so now we're talking about, let's say, humanoid robots. Let's talk about humanoid robots. Again, just as a side note, the robotics field is so vast because we're not even sure what a robot actually is, okay? Is it a humanoid robot with 2 legs and 2 arms? Or is it something that doesn't have legs but 5 arms? Does the arm have a hand with how many fingers? So everything is possible in robotics. Now, the humanoid robot industry, led by Tesla, Figure, and others, is focusing on humanoid robots, I think, out of simplicity, and also because the world is built for humans. So therefore, it's a little bit easier to navigate the world with this machine if it's built like a human. But let's get back to the presentation. Let's assume we're talking about humanoid robot. So what Professor Gupta is talking about is that hands are useful but also limiting. What does that mean? It means that hands, if a robot learns, let's say from an egocentric camera, so it has a camera and it looks and it sees a pen, and then it sees its own hand grasp that pen, or excuse me, it sees, now the robot is learning from other, let's say a human is grabbing a pen, has an egocentric camera in front of her, and when she's grabbing the pen, the robot that is learning that action sees the hand. Now that hand is useful because it's like a pointer telling the robot, okay, this is where you grab and this is how you grab, but it's also obscuring the actual handle. And therefore, the robot doesn't ever see that part of the handle where the hand wraps around. And how do you solve that problem? Well, what they present in this paper, again, link in the show notes, is sort of the video in-painting diffusion model, VIDM, where they separate the agent, the hand, from the object and the environment, the pen, and the rest of the kitchen. They separate those two. And then they have the pen, and the way they separate this is, like, imagine you grab a pen and you move it from A to B. Now you can do video in-painting with diffusion models. So you can basically generate a video which is based on the actual pen being moved, but remove the hand. So that's the idea. And why is that useful? Now you have two separated, they call it factorizing, which is you have the hand, which grabs the pen and moves the pen from A to B, separated from the pen, which is being moved. And while the hand is doing the motion without you seeing the pen is doing the motion without you seeing the hand. And from those two factorized representation of the scene, you can learn a more interesting representation of the actual, moving the pen. And that's the idea. Now, Professor Gupta claims that there's a lot of progress here and performance improvements. I'm not here to judge that. I'm just presenting that as an idea, because the fundamental goal, of course, in humanoid robotics is to have a good representation of what you can do with an object, and very, very importantly also what the object does once you grab it or once you do something with it. Think of a factory robot, right? You want to understand that when the robot grabs a hammer, that it's going to move from A to B through space. It might, let's say, interact with humans, which is dangerous, and that's not a good thing, and so on and so forth. The third thing that Professor Gupta mentions is videos are 2D. Now, how can we learn from a 2D representation and go into 3D? The paper construct Hempel's estimation in 3D using videos is literally explaining that. So imagine you have 2D, you want to transfer that into 3D. I think we've spoken about this quite a bit. Kang-Min He, for example, is working on this. The idea is, of course, how can we see physics, right? This is the ultimate goal here. We see something in 2D in a video, and we learn from that the three-dimensional representation, and also the physics, the forces that act on it, and Professor Gupta actually talks about this in the presentation. He mentions the difficulty of understanding the forces. So if I take a hammer and I hit the hammer, a nail with the hammer, I don't have a good sense for how hard I'm hitting and how much force I'm putting on. Now, technically, you could learn that. Okay, you could just watch the speed of the hammer and see how that translates into force. Maybe you can also learn from the shape of the hammer and the look of the hammer, what kind of materials it's made of. So there's opportunities down that route, but of course we're kind of in a situation now where we might have to maybe hard code some of that, or use maybe a representation map where the robot sees a hammer and then compares with a database of hammers and then realizes, okay, this hammer is, I don't know, made out of titanium, so it has this type of weight, and it accepts those types of forces. And that's an interesting problem. I think the 3D or the inverse, the sort of the inverse problem of computer graphics, which is real to sim. So how can I go see something in reality, take a picture of it, and then turn it into sim and be effectively still real, like understand the forces and the weight? That's an open problem, a very interesting problem that I'm personally incredibly excited about, right? So imagine you watch a video about somebody doing stuff, and you can infer the physics from that video, right? This is really the holy grail of simulation. This is something NVIDIA is working on, amongst others. The fourth thing, avoid policy compound errors. This is the sort of the canonical imitation learning problem. How can we learn from out of distribution situations? So in other words, if I watch behavioral cloning, if I use behavioral cloning, I'm really good within the distribution of possible data that I've seen, right? If I use behavioral cloning driving a car, I understand the car drives very well if the actual people that have been driven and recorded and that the machine has learned from have been driving on that type of road or a similar type of road. But what happens to out of distribution stuff? What happens if there's all of a sudden a unicorn on the road that is never seen before? It doesn't know what to do. So what they propose here is, I would say, the holy grail of Gen AI, which is they generate, use diffusion models to generate even more. Let's say they take a road and then they generate many versions of that road with different types of out of distribution type events. So the tree falls on the road and the road is flooded and the flood is full of crocodiles and blah, blah, blah. So the point here is that you can use Gen AI to generate more pictures and more videos with more scenarios, and therefore have a larger distribution of possible outcomes, and then use, let's say, a transformer-based model, for example, to accumulate those outcomes and have non-zero probabilities for things that might happen, even with very, very, very low probability, but they still could happen. And that's incredibly important, for example, in reinforcement learning as far as value functions are concerned. So to summarize Professor Gupta's presentation, it's in the sort of tradition of robot learning from video, which is, I think, a very important field. He's discussing 4 points. One is affordance maps. Then he's discussing the problem of sort of occlusion with hands, which are important. Hands are important in terms of signaling where to grab stuff, but then also they occlude stuff, so they offer a factorized representation of the scene. They talk, third, he talks about 2D to 3D translation, or the inverse problem of computer graphics, which is how can we go from real to sim and still capture the physics. And fourth, he's talking about sort of the out of distribution problem of imitation learning and solving that with a generative AI. Thank you.